So I'd like to call the meeting of the Legislative Committee to order. First order of business, could I have the roll? And we have somebody on the line as well, right? Mr. Keeley?
Ms. Dillon?
Here.
Mr. Rosensteel?
Here.
Mr. Keeley?
Here.
Mr. Boykin, you have a quorum?
Thank you. All right. So the next item is state and federal, or approval of the committee agenda. Guess I need a motion.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Item 2, state and federal legislation. Mr. Durman?
Yes, thanks, Grant. Just before we get started, I just wanted to clarify on the cover page on Ledge 7 where we identified the AB 761. That was there in error. We are not presenting that bill. It was held on suspense in the Assembly and is not moving forward, so there's no reason for the board to take another look, or the committee to take another look at that bill. So the bills that we're going to be presenting today are identical, HR 1628 and S 779 both in Congress. These bills are substantively identical to two bills that were considered in the last Congress and did not progress at all, and the board opposed those bills as well. What this bill does is it creates another basis upon which liabilities of pension funds are required to be disclosed. In this particular case, it would be disclosed to the federal government in a particular way for plan years beginning on or after January 1, 2014. Similar to other funding disclosures, it would require that liabilities be calculated using a discount rate, which is substantially lower than what we assume when we do our valuations. In this case, it would be based on what they term as the risk-free rate. So it would make the liabilities of pension plans substantially higher than they are reflected in the valuations, and requires very specific information to be disclosed to the U.S. Treasury. Failure to comply with the law would not have an impact necessarily on CalSTRS. It would have an impact on the ability of the state or school districts to issue tax-free bonds, because that's the penalty for noncompliance. The difficulty, the challenge associated with these kinds of bills is that it causes a lot of confusion, because right now we do evaluation based on assumptions that the board adopts. The most significant one being is, what do we assume that the rate of return is going to be in our investments? Now there is a governmental accounting standards which will be taking effect very shortly that in our particular circumstance for the time being would require that liabilities be calculated on a different basis than strictly on the investment return. Moody's, for purposes of their credit risk analysis, are using a different methodology to determine the liabilities associated with pensions, and now this would be a fourth one. So there are going to be lots of numbers out there, all trying to articulate what the liabilities associated with pensions are. They're all going to be very different, and it will cause a lot of confusion. It's done for the purposes of trying to provide some transparency, but at least in the case of CalSTRS, we have remarkable transparency. Most of these numbers are reflected in our financial report. Our valuations are posted online. They can watch it online in terms of the valuation. So it's not altogether clear from our standpoint what the value of this is, other than it does create a lot of confusion. One thing that is new to this bill relative to what was being done last year was it also prohibits the Congress from having the federal government bail out pension plans. And other than one comment that was made by a governor in another state a couple of years ago, there's never been any suggestion that the federal government would bail out state or local pension plans. So it's sort of not clear what problem that's trying to address. But in light of all of that, as a result of that, we do recommend that the committee oppose both bills.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from committee members or any other members? Yes.
Move staff's recommendation.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Dana, did you want to speak?
Nope, I wasn't going to move it, but I couldn't get my.
Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, I guess we need a roll call vote. We have Mr. Keeley on the phone.
Mr. Keeley?
Yes.
Ms. Dillon?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes.
Oh, that's all the. All right, motion passes.
Okay, just before we move on to the next, oh,
Oh,
sorry.
I just want to mention, obviously, we always communicate your legislative positions, and this is a good example where we want to think about how we want to do that, because we all recognize there are no standards for titling bills, unfortunately. So often bill titles have misdirection embedded in them. This is one of those bills. It's a Transparency Act, but in fact it isn't. It's a Confusion Act. So we really do want to make sure that people realize we're not against transparency, but for political reasons, the bill obviously is titled the way it is titled. But we do need to make sure that the right message is sent by opposing a bill with this type of title, that it is in fact because we want clear standards that are recognized nationally and thoughtful standards. So we will do that.
That's an important point to make. Thanks, Jack.
Before moving on to item 3, I just give an update on legislation in the leg summary, since there's been some activity since this item was put together. Assembly Bill 125, which is the board's bill on including the CFO and the COO and the positions that the board has authority over the classification. That bill did move out of the Assembly. It's now in the Senate. It was amended to require that we provide some specific information on an annual basis to the fiscal committees with respect to the savings associated with those positions and other activities. Assembly Bill 611, which currently is a relatively technical change, but could end up being a vehicle for addressing the funding of the plan, also moved out of the Assembly, is now in the Senate. As I said, Assembly Bill 761 was held in the Assembly Appropriations Committee, so that bill at least will not move forward this year. Assembly Bill 989, which is a bill that would allow us to increase our utilization of electronic transmission of information that was started a couple of years ago, where that becomes a default mechanism by which we communicate to the members, but they can always opt in to receiving things in writing. That has moved into the Senate, as well as our the housekeeping bill and then, which is Assembly Bill 1379, and Assembly Bill 1381, which is the conforming bill to the Pepper Act from last year. Still waiting for some resolution of some issues between the legislature and the governor on some aspects of PEPRA that will affect the final provisions of AB 1381, but that bill at least is moving forward. And then Senate Bill 13, which was the urgency bill to do some cleanup on PEPRA, is also awaiting some final discussions between the administration and the legislature on some provisions of that. So all of our bills are moving forward. They're all on target, and be happy to answer any questions about any of those bills before we move on.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any questions at this time. So item 3, approval of the minutes of the April meeting. Any discussion on the minutes?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor with aye?
Aye.
Oh, do we need a roll call vote, Brian? Okay. Okay. I heard all ayes. Harry?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes. Item 4, committee input for 2013-14
Yes,
work plan.
this is sort of the opportunity for you to give us some direction about additional things you'd like us to include in the work plan for the committee for next year. We identified the things that we typically do, obviously, like we just did, evaluating and taking positions on state or federal legislation or regulations affecting CalSTRS. We'll have, we can plan on having John Stanton do one in person and however many electronic meetings with you to sort of get an update on what's going on at the federal level. We are also planning at the offsite in October of inviting some legislative staff to give some input or provide some context about what's going on at the legislature, the state legislature, on pensions in general, apart from what's going on with CalSTRS. And then also, I think it's a good opportunity for us to take a look at the board's policy with respect to legislation and the committee's charter to sort of bring it up to date on things, to see what may have changed. In particular, to make sure that that both the policy and the charter adequately reflect the risk associated with legislative proposals. So we'll bring that to you at some point in the course of the year. But really, we just want to see if there's any other items that you would like us to include apart from these as far as the work plan that we'd present to you in July.
I don't see any other
Okay.
input.
Great.
Thank you. All right. Next item, Deputy CEO report.
Nothing more to report.
Okay. Review of information requests. I didn't see any, hear any. Okay. Draft agenda for the next committee meeting? Okay, we have it before us.
We're
I
good?
don't see any comments. Opportunity, oh, are you buzzed in, Dana? Okay.
When, when would we be meeting, next? The draft agenda still says June, so I'm sure that just got copied over. When
Yeah.
are we thinking, September?
If necessary, I mean, if there's no activity, certainly in November, when you start looking at proposals for next year. Normally, you don't need to meet in September because there's really nothing to act on. All the bills would have done whatever they did. And we'll certainly try to keep you informed as legislation progresses. We'll communicate that to the board. Yes, absolutely.
Because they need to,
They need to finish up. They'll be finishing in September, and then the governor will take actions in October,
and he has till the end of October to sign them, right?
middle
Is
of
that what-
October, I
middle
think
of
it is.
October?
Yeah, I think for this year it's the middle of October.
All right.
So, but we'll certainly communicate to the board as a whole as bills move through the process. So I don't know that, I doubt we will need to meet in September unless something serious breaks, in which case, obviously, we can call the committee at any time to meet if necessary.
All righty. Thank you.
We'll open up the meeting to any public comment. Okay, seeing none, this meeting's adjourned.